Alright, so this is Social Studies 7H3a, part 2. And this one we're talking about Indian, or the country of India, is independence. If you'll remember your history from last year, the British had a giant empire. It spanned the whole world. Their flag is called the Union Jack, and the old saying was, the sun never sets on the Union Jack, or the British flag, or the British Empire. Same thing. They had a colony in Australia. They had 13 colonies in the what would later become the United States. They certainly had Canada. They had colonies in the Caribbean islands. Of course, they had the British, the Isle itself. They had colonies in Africa, and they had a big bad boy named India. India was their prized possession. It was like their crown jewel. And the reason why India was the crown jewel in the British Empire is because it was so full of natural resources. It was in a great location, and the natural resources that were there in India were greatly coveted by the British. They were there a long time. They set up a very, very organized society where the Indians, the native Indians that lived in India before the British got there, the indigenous people of India, they were, by law, second-class citizens below the British. The British were first-class citizens. So if you were from the United Kingdom and you moved to India, maybe you're like some poor guy in Great Britain, and you save up enough money to move yourself to India and your family, you automatically become like part of the upper echelon of society. So this was a great place, and this was a great way to get people from the British Isles to move to India, because they wanted that status. They wanted that first-class status. Well, in about the 1880s, this kind of starts to fall apart for the British. There's some grumblings. The Indians really don't like being treated like second-class citizens, and once again, here's that feeling of, what is it that will draw all these Indians together and make them want their own country? What is that feeling or that belief? Don't answer, class. I want the people at home to be thinking about it. We studied in part 1. Ah, yes, you're right if you said nationalism. Nationalism begins to take root in India, and the Indians really feel like that, hey, wait a minute. This is our country, and it was our country before the British got here. What are they doing here anyway, ruling us? We should be ruling ourselves. And the Indian National Congress is formed in 1885, and it's just a group of people who are very nationalistic about Indian culture and Indian affairs. They want their own country, and they attract large numbers of Hindus. Well, there's another organization that starts up roughly around the same time. You notice 1906, this is the Muslim League. And you guessed it, the Muslim League is open to people who worship in the religion of Islam, or follow the teachings of Islam, which we call Muslim. So that should tell you something. There's large numbers of Hindus living in India. There's also large numbers of Muslim living in India. You should remember that, because that's going to come later. It's going to mean something later. And by the time we get to World War I, 1914, 1918, things are really starting to kick in here. The Indians think to themselves, hey, if we will fight on the British side, maybe they'll let us be free after the war. They owe us that. What they found out was the British had no intention of giving up India, not peacefully anyway. And so after the war, in 1919, there's a big gathering outside of this giant temple, and Amritsar is the town that it was in. This happened in 1919. After the Indian people realized that the British aren't going anywhere, they don't intend to give us our country, even though we fought and bled and died for them, oh, we're still going to be second-class citizens. We can't have that. So there's thousands of people gathered outside this temple, and they're making a protest. And the British soldiers are called in, and they kill 400 of the Indian nationalists. 1,200 of them are wounded. So altogether, 1,600 people are shot by the British. And this is really the beginning of the end of the British in India. It was in all of the newspapers. It was just an outrage to all the Indians, Muslim, Hindu, it didn't matter. Everybody was upset about Amritsar. This is almost like the Boston Massacre in this country, when the British fired on the Americans that were trying to protest. It really galvanized the American public into saying, yes, we need to fight for the revolution. Well, Amritsar really galvanized the Indians into thinking, hey, let's get out and get our own country. They find a spokesperson or a leader in the name of Mahatma Gandhi, this guy, this little old fellow. He wears these Coke bottle glasses. He doesn't look like much, but he's a powder keg. He teaches two things: civil disobedience and nonviolent protest. So counterintuitive. He said the way that we're going to fight the British is by not fighting. And we'll just disobey the laws that we think, this is what civil disobedience is. We'll just disobey the British laws that we don't think are right. And when we want to protest something that the British have done, we're going to do it non-violently. So we'll take to the streets without any weapons. And if they fight against us, we won't fight back. And we just won't pay taxes that we don't think are right. And Mahatma Gandhi was like a little mosquito buzzing in the ear of a giant. The giant would swat at it, and the mosquito would come back and bite it in the ear again. And then it would swat at it again, oops, and the mosquito would come back. He was this little guy who just kept on and kept on and kept on, and he would not go away. And after many, many years of protest and him being arrested and threatened and all kinds of things, the Government of India Act is passed in 1935 by the British Parliament. It grants India almost full independence. Then, after World War II in 1947, the British finally just give up. They say, we can't handle this. We can't handle this. Every time we turn around, Mahatma Gandhi is giving some speech about how these people need to be independent, and there's thousands of people leaving their jobs and protesting in the streets. We can't get anything done down there. Fine. The Indians can have India. And that's great. Woo! All right. But then something else happens. It's pretty bad. The Muslims and the Hindus, who once united under nationalism, now that they have their own country, have begun to fight with one another. Because obviously the Muslims wanted India to be a Muslim-run country, and the Hindus want India to be a Hindu-run country. People in charge, it's not important who the guy's name is, but the people in charge decide there's only one way to settle this religious conflict, and that's to divide India into three different countries: East and West Pakistan and India. East and West Pakistan, you guessed it, is where the Muslims were going to settle and be, and India, as we know it, is where the Hindus were allowed to be. And that's how nationalism leads to Indian independence. You need to know that Mahatma Gandhi and his teachings of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience are really responsible for granting India's independence. If it hadn't been for that man and those two ideas, and those were the ideas he used to teach nationalism, India would not be independent. So, they have a lot of thanks and they have a lot of admiration for Mahatma Gandhi. Sad thing, after independence, I believe, or maybe a little bit before, right around that same time, Gandhi was shot and killed on his way to worship in a temple. So, you know, he's no longer around, and we don't know what he would have been like, but anyway, he is big time deal in nationalism and independence. If you have any questions, bring them tomorrow, and make sure you watch part 3, and if there is a part 4, watch that too. Thank you.